Hilchos Maaseh Hakorbanos Perek Sheni, the laws of sacrificial procedures, chapter 2. This is one of those places where you see how organized the Rambam is in his presentation of the laws. Before we get into the weeds of any specific procedures for specific sacrifices, the Rambam spends these opening chapters putting out the background or the backdrop against which all the sacrifices function. Like yesterday in chapter 1, we spent the whole time talking about the different types of sacrifices, which animals, which species, communal, individual. Nowhere is it codified like this in the Mishnah or the Talmud. The Rambam had to extract all the information and put it in order for the learner to approach it with ease. Once you know all the general information, you can get into the specifics. And today is just the same thing, not with regards to animals, but with regards to the nesachim. Nesachim is in English translated as libations. It basically refers to the wine and the flour, and also the oil, as we'll see, that would accompany every single sacrifice. And instead of getting into the weeds of specific ones, the Rambam today will spend the time talking generally about what are the nesachim, which sacrifices they would accompany, and how you would go about offering those nesachim. So the Rambam begins halacha aleph. Hayayin v'hasoilas shemeviyin im hakorban. The wine and the flour, which is brought with a sacrifice, hema nikroim nesachim, are called halachically nesachim. When you see the word nesachim, it's a general reference, general umbrella, referring to all the accompaniments to the sacrifice. The Rambam here says wine and flour, and you'll soon see later that all the flour came with oil. The hasoilas levada nikras minchas nesachim. When you're referencing just the flour of all the nesachim, but you're zooming into the flour alone is called minchas nesachim. It's the flour offering of the nesachim. What are the general laws pertaining to this flour and wine? Uminchas nesachim, the mincha, the flour part of the nesachim, eino te'una leitnufa v'le hagasha v'le levayna. Doesn't require anything which a regular flour offering would require. There's a type of offering called the mincha, whose center is flour. And over there are laws that apply to it. You have to wave it, you have to touch it to the corner of the mizbeach, you have to put frankincense in the mixture. But the minchas nesachim, the flour as it's part of the libations which accompanies a major sacrifice, doesn't require any of these things. Doesn't have to be waved, brought close to the mizbeach, frankincense. Aval te'una melach. It does require salt. As we saw in the last set of laws, no such thing as something going onto the altar without salt. The kula nisrefes al mizbeach hachitzon, the entirety of the quantity of flour that would accompany every sacrifice is burnt on the outer altar. What about the wine? Says the Rambam, "Bi'isnaseh chayayin al hamizbeach." The wine would be poured onto the altar. Ve'einoisnin oisei al ha'esh, but you wouldn't put it into the fire. Elo magbi'a yadai, the Kohen would raise his hand. Ve'yotzek al hayesoid, and pour it onto the base of the mizbeach. Ve'hu yedid lashisin, from where it would go down to the major pipes. Shisin, the Talmud talks about these pipes. They went all the way down to the center of the earth. They went to the depths, basically completely out of the system of the Holy Temple. Now this Rambam has raised great controversy because if we take a look at this depiction of the Mizbeach, so we can see the wood piles on top of the altar. That's what the Rambam says, you don't put it into the fire. But the Rambam says you put it into the Yossi, into the base, which is down here. In the Mishnah, when it describes the procedure on Sukkot, which was the once a year when they didn't just offer wine as a libation, they also offered water as a libation, the Mishnah describes how they used to put the water and the wine in two bowls on top of the Mizbeach. These two bowls over here. One was for wine, one was for water. And the presumption is that the wine bowl was the one that was used all year for regular nesachim wine. So how is the Rambam saying that the wine would be poured only on the base? So the Kesef Mishnah, it's a primary commentator on the Rambam, the Kesef Mishnah says these bowls were only used on Sukkot. That's why it's only described in the Mishnah that describes Sukkot. On Sukkot, you wanted to do the wine libation, the water libation together, you put it in those bowls. But all year round, the nesachim wine was poured onto the base. And the Rebbe once spoke about this, and he offered a very interesting interpretation, reasoning for this difference. Why all year is the wine poured at the base, and on Sukkot it's poured together with the water. And the reason is because all year round, the wine is considered tafil, a secondary aspect to the sprinkling of the blood. One of the main features of every sacrifice was after it was slaughtered, its blood was received in a vessel, and the vessel was taken to the mizbeach, where you would sprinkle the blood onto the mizbeach. The wine pouring is like a secondary element to that sprinkling of the blood. And so the same way the sprinkling of the blood was done typically at the bottom of the mizbeach, sometimes at the base, but most times just on the wall, so too the nesachim wine was poured to the base. On Sukkot, the wine and the water libations were very much interrelated. So they followed together. As a matter of fact, it's even learned from a verse which says, Haseich nesech, twice the word nisuch, twice the word pouring, one for pouring of wine, one for pouring of water, since it's derived from that double expression, juxtaposition, so we put them together. What's the mystical meaning of it? Wine represents meaning and intellectual understanding, rationality of Judaism. Water represents Kabbalat Ol. It's bland, no taste, doing things because we're supposed to. The thing with the mind, using the intellect to understand Yiddishkeit, to understand Hashem, to understand His mitzvahs, is that it's very dangerous. While it could provide a very rich meaning and significance to Judaism, if you only rely on your seichel, if you only rely on your intellect, you can go off the beaten path. And therefore, all year round, the wine had to be subservient to the sprinkling of the blood. Blood represents warmth. Blood represents chayut, energy, animation, vitality. As long as you sprinkled your blood on the mizbeach, if all your warmth and all your chayus and all your energy is given over to Hashem, then you can pour the wine, bring the seichel into Yiddishkeit, and there'll be no problems. Which is why all year you poured it by the base. Never divorce the seichel from the warmth of Judaism. On Sukkot comes after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur was a time when every Jew's slate is wiped clean. Their connection to God is brought out in a revealed way. It's the first holiday after Yom Kippur, and so you're able to elevate the wine and celebrate it at the highest level. The same way you had a full service of the water, you could have a full service of the wine. The intellect can be totally subsumed in service of God, even without the prior commitment of the blood. On its own, it can be on the Mizbeach. A very interesting, esoteric explanation that the Rebbe offered over here. At any rate, halachically speaking, according to the Rambam, the wine was always poured at the base. Halacha base. Which sacrifices require nesachim? Ein to nesachim elo eilas behema ushlamim bilvat. Only a burnt offering and a peace offering, and in the burnt offering themselves, only the ones of animals. Remember yesterday, burnt offerings can come from both animals and birds. The Rambam is saying only eilas behema. An animal burnt offering and a peace offering are the ones that have these libations accompanying them. Bein hayu karban sibur or karban yacha, whether they were a communal sacrifice or individual sacrifice. Oy keves yoldis, ve'elish al kohen gadol. It could even be a sheep offered by the woman who gave birth, or the ram offered by the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur on his own behalf. Hayil ve'hein oyles tu'inin mesachim. Bottom line, they're burnt offerings. They require mesachim. They require libations. Aval ha'oif, but any bird offering, v'ha'ashamayis v'achatoyis, and guilt and sin offerings, ein mevi'in imayim mesachim. There are no libations brought with them, except where Torah says so. Chutz mechatas mitzayra v'ashamay, except for when a person is healed from tsaras, from the skin lesions, and he brings a sin offering and a guilt offering. Shenispar niskeim b'Torah, their libations accompanying wine and flour offerings are clearly, explicitly stated in the Torah. They're an exception. Other than that, sin offerings don't have nesachim. How do we know? How do we know what is the source that we don't bring libations together with a sin offering or a guilt offering? Shenemar, because it says in the passage that introduces the whole mitzvah of nesachim, it says lefale neder ay nedava. Libations only accompany a sacrifice that can be expressed as a vow or a donation. Davar haba b'neder nedava, which means only sacrifices that are brought voluntarily when promised or pledged. They are the ones that have nesachim accompanying them. Yatsu chatas v'ashamu b'chayru ma'aseru pesach, that excludes a sin offering, a guilt offering, a firstborn, a tithe offering, and the Passover sacrifice. Hayil ve'einon bayin b'neder nedava, since they don't have the choice to bring them voluntarily. They have to be brought. Ein tu'enim nesachim, they don't require the libations. Uminayin lahavi shalmi chagiga v'eilas re'iyah l'nesachim. 1 second. If all it is things that can be brought voluntarily, there are peace offerings and burnt offerings that have to be brought obligatorily. The shlamim that are brought as chagiga, celebratory offerings for the holiday. The oil, the burnt offering that's brought upon seeing Hashem in the temple on the holiday as well. Why do they have to have nesachim if they cannot be brought voluntarily? Shenemar, for that the verse adds, oy b'mayadechem, or on your holidays. That means the holiday sacrifices, the sacrifices that are associated with holiday, they have to have nesachim. Halacha dalid kama hu shir nesachim. How much is the amount of the libations? And as we're going to see, it progressively rises with the size or the category of animal. Niske keves ay kivsa. Whenever bringing a sheep, male or female, the libations are isarein silas, 1/10 of an ephah. An ephah is a volume measurement, dry volume measurement. 1/10 of an ephah. Isarein, 1/10 of flour. Bolul birviyis hahin shemen, mixed in with 1/4 of a hin. Hin is a liquid measurement. 1/4 of a hin of oil. The yayin lenesach reviyas ahin, as well as 1/4 of a hin of wine. V'chein Lipskier eis, and the same is for the goats. Goats and sheep are considered in the same family. Bein katan, bein gadol, bein zachar, bein nekeva, whether large or small, in other words, adult or young, whether it's male or female, or the libations that accompany a ewe. A ewe is a female sheep, even though it's an adult, also the minimum amount, 1/10 with a quarter and a quarter of wine and oil. Aval niskei ayil, once you rise in the hierarchy, the libations accompanying a ram, it's double the flour, 2/10 of an ephah of flour, bolul mixed in, bishlishi sahin shemen, v'yayin lenesach shlishi sahin, mixed with a third of oil, plus a third of a hin of oil, plus a third of a hin of wine. Rising to a bull or a calf, the libations there would rise as well. Bein scharim, bein nekevus, whether it's male or female, shloisha esreinim seiles, an additional 3/10 of an ephah of flour, bolul bechatzi ahin shemen, mixed with half a hin of oil, the yayin lanesach chatzi ahin, as well as wine, a half a hin. You always notice the wine and oil amounts are always the same. And the oil never was brought by itself, it was mixed into the flour. Halacha hey, Elohin nisachim, bein lo'ela, bein lishlamim. These are the nisachim that follow, whether it's for a burnt offering or for a peace offering. Kashir, azel, lechol echad, ve'echad, the same amount for everyone. Shanemar, as it says in the passage concerning nisachim. Kamispar asher tasu, the same number, like the number that you do. Kacha tasu la'echad kamisparam, so you shall do for everyone according to their numbers. In other words, it doesn't matter whatever category of sacrifice it is. If it's a sheep, it's this. A ram, it's this. A bull or a calf, it's this. We don't add to these amounts, we don't subtract. I don't care how generous you are or how poor you are, this is the libations that comes with these sacrifices. If you did add or subtract anything, disqualified. The one exception to this rule, the one exception to this chart of sheep, ram, bull, is the burnt offering sheep that comes on the day of the Omer offering, second day of Pesach, which its libations are shnei esreinim bolul b'shlishi sahin shemen. It's a sheep, but it has the nesachim of a ram. 2/10 mixed with a third of a hin of oil. Afal pisha nichbel asaltoi. Nevertheless, though, even though its flour is doubled, lo nichbel yenoi. Its wine is not doubled. El yayin lanesach revi sahin. The wine remains a quarter, like as though it were a regular sheep. Halacha Vav says the Rambam Hamitzaira, if you look in the Torah, you'll see that a person who is healed from tzaras, lesions, meviim shleisha kvasim shaloi, brings together with 3 sheep that he has to bring, shein chatas va'asham va'ila, guilt offering, sin offering, and burnt offering, shleisha esreinim. He brings 3/10 of an ephah of flour. Umi pi Shmuel lamdu, tradition tells us that these 3/10 are not separate from the regular nesachim as we know them. Shehin bayin b'glal azvachim shaloi. The reason he has to bring 3/10 is because he's bringing 3 sheep. 1/10 with every sheep, mixed with a quarter of a hin of oil, or revi'is yayin kol yisadan mishlashtan, and then a quarter of a hin of wine, together with every one of the 10s, like any other libations accompanying sheep. If somebody were to offer a palgos, what's a palgos? We learned yesterday. It's somewhere in between a sheep and a ram, the first 30 days of the second year. It hasn't quite yet graduated to being a ram. He must bring the accompanying libations as you would usually bring for a ram, but nevertheless, it's not considered as if you brought the proper sacrifice, because since it's in doubt whether you're bringing a sheep or a ram, you don't actually know what you're bringing. Once you're on the altar, we're going to make you bring the stuff for a ram. But you got to go back and bring the sacrifice again. Whether it's a sheep, bring an actual sheep. If it's a ram, bring an actual ram. Halacha Zayin, we keep on referencing hin, quarter of a hin, half a hin, third of a hin. What's a hin? Ha-hin hu shnei masar loig. Hin is one of the liquid measurements. It's 12 log. Ukvar hedanu shira loig. In mides acheres, we've actually spoken about how much a log is. This is the log. 12 times that is the hin. We've already explained how much the log is, together with other measurements, also in halacha, bihilchos eruvin, in the laws of the eruv. And an isarain, which is the dry measurement, the 10th of an ephah of flour that we kept on referencing, is also called oimer in the Torah. Shehu shir chala, which is actually the amount of dough that has to be had in order to be obligated in the obligation of chala, which we discussed in the last book of the Rambam. And we explained its amount in the laws relating to chala. So we're not going to repeat it over here because we already did it in those laws. When we measure out the libations or the flour offerings, whether communal or individual offerings, even though you're going to end up bringing 3/10 for a bull or 2/10 for a ram, they didn't have bowls in the temple, measuring cups in the temple that had 3/10 or 2/10. Everybody used everybody used this one. There was an isarin cup in the temple, and you used it either once for a sheep, twice for a ram, or 3 times for a bull. Also the oil that was used for the nisachim, you measured it out in using its measuring cup in the temple. And here they actually did have, as the Rambam said in the laws of the temple's vessels, they actually had one for each. They had a half a hin measuring cup, third of a hin measuring cup, quarter hin. This was used for a sheep, this one for the ram, this one for the bull. And the oil that would accompany an individual flour offering. A person's not bringing a regular sacrifice and he has nesachim accompanying it. He's bringing flour to Hashem. So as we're going to see, the way it used to work was, it would have to be divisible by an isarin. You could bring 1 isarin, 2, 3, 10, up to 60. So that was only a flour offering. How much oil came along with the flour, the Rambam will tell us later. 1 loig. It's a smaller measurement. 1 loig per isarin. So when measuring out the oil for a mincha in the temple, they used to use the isarin for the flour and the loig for the oil. Baleik shebamikdash. However many esrainis in plural is esrainis, were brought, that's how many lugin of oil were added to the mixture. As we explained in the laws of the temple's vessels, any overflow of the measuring cups used for the flour, it's mundane, it's not holy. Because in the temple, only the inside of this vessel was holy, not the outside. Whereas overflow of the wine and the oil is actually holy, because it overflows the back of the utensil. And all the liquid vessels were anointed with the anointing oil on the inside and on the outside. Who cares? Who cares if it was sanctified inside and outside? Why should an overflow become holy? After all, the intent of the person measuring it, he only wants what's inside the vessel, not outside. Why should that become holy? We want to avoid an issue. We don't want people to ever think that something that's been in a holy vessel can become mundane. Once it's been in a holy vessel, even if it's overflow, it has to stay holy. What did they use the overflow for? You can't bring it as part of the sacrifice, you already have enough. If there's another sacrifice, use it for that. Add it to the other sacrifices accessories. But if they stay overnight, they become disqualified just by virtue of staying overnight. If not, you add them to the mizbeach's desserts. What's a mizbeach's desserts? So we said many times that if it was a busy day in the temple, there would always be sacrifice. What if it wasn't a busy day? It's honorable for the mizbeach to constantly be busy. So they always had a back storage of sacrifices ready to go whenever the mizbeach needed dessert. And so these extra overflow oil and wine would be converted to funds. Keitzad, says the Rambam, how was it used for the mizbeach dessert? Loikchin bahem oilos. You would use this wine and oil for funds to buy burnt offerings, habasar lashem v'ha'oilis lakayanim, from which the meat would be burnt to Hashem and the hides would be benefited by the kohanim. Halacha Yud Beis hasoiles im Hashem shel nesachim einon me'akvin esayayin. There are 2 parts to the nesachim, as we started the chapter with. There's the wine and there's the flour and the oil. So the flour and the oil aren't essential to the wine. V'lei hayayin me'akvan, nor is the wine essential to the flour and the oil. Which means if you only have one or the other, just bring one or the other. Neither are the libations in general essential to the sacrifice. You could bring your sacrifice today. If you only have wine or access to wine and flour later, 10 days later, bring it 10 days later. This applies whether you're an individual or community. For who shall I cut you on nesachim, again, provided that you never sanctified the nesachim in a holy utensil. But if you put them into a holy utensil, as we just said, if they stay overnight, they become disqualified just by the fact that they stayed overnight. You can only bring these libations, these accompanying offerings, from mundane stuff. Unholy grain, unholy wine, unholy oil. You can't bring them from the Kohen's 2% that he gets from the grain, the second tenth that's holy, that you bring to Jerusalem, first fruits, none of that. Even the Thanksgiving offering, which as the Rambam said yesterday is the peace offering, which comes along with bread. Shemevi lachma min hamaiser, whose bread can be brought from Maiser Sheni, lo yaviu nesachim ela min achulin. The libations, they have to come from unholy, regular flour, wine, and oil. Halacha Yudaleh, the Rambam addresses a very interesting anomaly. And it's fascinating that it's very appropriate to these times. In the book of Yechezkel, Prophet Ezekiel, at the very end, the last couple of chapters, he tells over a vision that he beheld of the future third Beis HaMikdash and Mashiach's times, what the service in the temple is going to be when Mashiach comes. The Rebbe, now we're in the 9 days before Tisha B'Av, the Rebbe would often encourage that these days should be spent learning about the Holy Temple, both the way it's recorded about the Second Temple in the Rambam and in the Mishnah, but also the verses in Yecheskel which talk about the Third Temple. So, very divine providence to be learning this right now during the 9 days. At any rate, if you look in the verses in Yecheskel when he describes the service in the temple, there seem to be many contradictions to what it says in the Torah. All the nesachim amounts, all the libation amounts are all different. So the Rambam addresses this issue. He says, Kol shi'urei ha-nesachim ha'amudin b'sefer Yecheskel. All the amounts of the libations that are stated in the book of Yecheskel, chapter 45 and 46. Uminyan oisan Hakorbanos, as well as the numbers of sacrifices delineated over there. V'sidrei ha'avayda ha'ksuvim sham, and all the order of service that's written there. Kulan miluyim hein. They're all an inaugural service, a special inaugural service for the third temple. Ve'ein le'agin l'dayris. That's not an eternal thing. They didn't apply eternally. Elahanavi tziva u'peiresh, rather the prophet is commanding and is communicating, Keitzad yiu makrivin hamiluyin im chanukas hamizbeach, how are we going to offer the inaugural sacrifices and how are we going to inaugurate the mizbeach, bimei hamelech hamashiach k'sheyibana b'ayis shlishi, in the days of Mashiach, the King Mashiach, when we build the third temple. Just to pick some examples, because if we're anyways in the 9 days, may as well learn some psukim. It says in Yecheskel that on the 7 days of Sukkot, they're going to make burnt offerings to Hashem, 7 cows, 7 rams, and a goat. It's very different to what we do today. And then it says, mincha, ephah lapar. 1 ephah. We're talking over here about tenths of an ephah. So you bring 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. Here it says, for every bull you bring a full ephah. The ephah la'ayil yasa. Shemen hin la'ephah, a full hin. No quarter hin, third of hin, half a hin. Everything is full measurements. An ephah of flour, a hin of oil. And then it says the same thing also. On Shabbos, they bring this thing, 6 sheep and 1 ram. All different to what we do regularly on Shabbos in the Holy Temple. And again, ephah la'ayil, shemen hin, keeps on repeating itself, all these verses with completely different amounts. So the Rambam says that's very unique. That's only for Mashiach's times. The real deal is in the Torah. And the Rambam says, by the way, there's precedent for this. Halacha tezvav. Ukeshem shehikrivu hanesim bachanukas hamizbeach. The same way back in the Mishkan, tabernacle in the desert. There was an inauguration of the Mizbeach back then. And the leaders of the tribes brought certain sacrifices. Dvarim she'ein kemoisam l'deiros. They brought stuff that has no resemblance, no reflection ever in the future. V'hikrivu b'Shabbos. And they actually also brought, and it's an individual sacrifice, on Shabbos, which is a very big anomaly. Kachanasi makriv chanukase b'Shabbos la'asik shem mefurasham. So to the Nasi, which is Mashiach, King Mashiach, will bring his inaugural sacrifice on Shabbos in the future, as is explicit in the verses in Yecheskel. But again, not a reflection of the true halachic status of a regular libation. Just futuristic. V'chein Hakorbanos shehikrivu b'mei Ezra, habayim mehashevi. Also that which is recorded in the book of Ezra. It says habayim mehashvi v'nei hagoyla. The Jews who came from the exile, build the second temple, they brought 12 bulls and 96 rams and 77 sheep and 12 sin offerings, very random seemingly amounts. Says the Rambam miluyim hayu, that was an inaugural service for the second temple. The einam noyagin l'deiros, they don't apply for generations. So you see here, there's a theme. All the inaugural services were very different, very rare. Avol dvarim hanoyagin l'deiros, but those things that apply forever and that were constantly through the hundreds of years that the first and second temple stood, heim divrei Torah shepeirashnu k'mei shehetiku mipi Moshe Rabbeinu, are only the words of the Torah, the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, that as it was copied down from the mouth of Moshe. No adding and no subtracting. The Torah is the ultimate truth. All the other stuff, side halachas for side situations. It's called in Talmud Hayras Shah. A lesson for the time, a instruction for the time, but only a momentary thing, not an eternal thing. By the way, this resolves many other contradictions. In Yecheskel, you read it, there's many other things that he describes about temple service and all this stuff that's different to what we know in classic halacha. And the answer is the same. That's for the third temple. By the way, here's a diagram. We don't really know what the third temple is going to look like, but this is one of the opinions of how it looks. A little bit of a wider courtyard, a bunch of different little differences. But you know what? If we're in the 9 days, Kain Tiyalanu, so should we merit to have the third Beis HaMikdash and Mashiach Tzidkenu speedily in our days. Amen.